I'm Lauren Whitfield, 29 years old, and last Thanksgiving I stood in the cold with a bottle of vintage wine in my hand and nowhere to go. My father had just kicked me out of our family dinner in front of 24 relatives. What he didn't know as he told me to leave was that I had more money in one investment account than he'd made in a lifetime. The startup he once called my little distraction had just sold for $188 million, and I'd quietly walked away with nearly half of it. The only thing colder than that November wind was the silence that followed me down the front steps. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and tap that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to hold back your truth just to keep the peace. I grew up in Westfield, Massachusetts, a quiet suburb west of Boston where the streets stayed tidy and the expectations stayed high. My father, Charles, ran a small investment firm and believed in results above all else. Not kindness, not effort, not even love, just outcomes. He walked like a man who owned the sidewalk and talked like every word deserved applause. My mother, Elaine, moved through life like she was still on a pageant stage. Pearls always in place, smile always rehearsed. She believed grace could fix anything. If you didn't let the cracks show, our house was large white brick with navy shutters and a curved driveway lined with boxwoods. Matthew, our oldest brother, walked the path our father laid for him. Captain of the golf team, early admission to Columbia, straight into a junior partner role at the firm. My little sister Rachel sparkled in a different way. Homecoming queen debutante features in glossy magazines. Mom's pride was her reflection in Rachel's success, and Rachel knew just how to shine it back. And then there was me. I liked puzzles and computers, and asking why I took apart the family toaster in 5th grade, not to be difficult, but because I needed to know how it worked. I spent weekends learning to code, instead of learning to pose. My room wasn't full of medals or crowns. It was full of wires, old keyboards, and a whiteboard filled with notes nobody cared to ask about. I remember once in 10th grade, I won the state programming challenge, brought home a certificate and everything. My dad looked at it for maybe 2 seconds and said, "So will this help you get into a real school like Wharton?" I smiled, tucked it into my desk drawer, and didn't bring up the national finals the next month. By the time I graduated high school, I was valedictorian with a full ride to M8. When I told my parents at dinner, my mother dabbed her mouth and said, "Mitt is so technical. Don't you want a campus with more balance?" My father barely looked up from his wine, he said. I could always shift to business or law. Once I figured out what the real world needed, I took the scholarship anyway. I moved into a tiny dorm with a twin bed and a roommate who would later become my best friend, Erin Scott. She didn't flinch when I told her what I was working on. She listened, really listened, and when she saw my early prototype for a new kind of security protocol, she said, "Not this is cute, but Lauren, this is brilliant at MIT. I found a rhythm that finally matched my brain. I worked part-time jobs to cover what the scholarship didn't. I coded at night. I drank too much coffee. I got used to being invisible back home, so I stopped trying to explain anything to them. When I won a national award my junior year, my parents didn't even call. I don't think they noticed. The day I graduated, I stood on a stage in a cap that kept slipping off my curls and looked into a crowd of blank expressions. My parents arrived late, left early, and asked more about the caterer than my thesis. My father said, "Well, at least you finished. Now let's find you a proper job." But I already had other plans. I told them I wasn't going to interview at banks or firms. I was going to start my own tech company. The look on his face that moment, the pause, the smirk, the way he said, "tech company," like it was a punchline. I carried that memory with me every day after I moved into a studio apartment in Cambridge with a mattress on the floor and a desk made from an old door. I worked until my eyes burned. Built a prototype from scratch, found the one person who believed in what I was doing, David Park, and started building something real. They never knew what was coming. The summer after graduation, I moved into a one-room apartment over a laundromat in Cambridge. The floors tilted, the radiator clanked through the night, and the only view I had was a brick wall with peeling paint, but I didn't care. It was mine, and for the first time in my life, I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I worked from an old desk I'd found on the sidewalk and turned it into my command center. The prototype was slow to build. I barely slept. Noodles, caffeine, and a spreadsheet full of errors were my regular company. I'd wake up with code in my head, solve bugs in the shower, and fall asleep wondering if I'd made a mistake. I hadn't told my parents the full plan. They thought I was just between jobs. Dad called one evening while I was debugging a stubborn loop. His voice was sharp as ever. "So you're still playing with that security idea I'm building something, Dad? Well, I hope it pays for your rent soon. You're not fixing printers, are you?" He laughed at his own joke. I didn't. When I found David Park again, he'd worked on a class project with me at MIT. It felt like something fell into place. He understood my idea immediately. He didn't ask if it was a phase or a distraction. He sat with me in a coffee shop and read the early code like it was a blueprint to a new world. "This is solid," he said, pointing to a block of logic. "But your threat response needs more flexibility. Let me show you something." That's how we began. We called the company SafeLayer in those early days. We registered the LLC, split what little savings we had, and set up 2 laptops on my old door-turned desk. We worked side by side, often in silence, sometimes in total chaos. Investors weren't interested. Most barely made it to slide 5 before dismissing us. A few asked who was really in charge. Once a partner at a Boston firm told us to come back when you've got gray hair or a famous board member. So we took consulting jobs on the side. We fixed broken systems, wrote code for clients who didn't care what it did as long as it worked. Nights and weekends were for SafeLayer. We pushed out updates, tested patches, rewrote protocols. One Friday night, I found myself crying in the stairwell after my credit card bounced at the grocery store. The next morning, a photo of Matthew holding a wine glass popped up in the family group chat. Dad and I on the terrace. "Great news coming next week." I turned off notifications for the rest of the day. That Christmas, I stayed in Cambridge. Plane tickets were out of reach, and the weather had iced over half the region anyway. Mom left a voicemail about how disappointing it was not to come home for the holidays. "I suppose the little company comes first. Let us know if you need anything." They didn't ask why I hadn't come. They didn't ask if I was okay. 18 months after David joined, we had a breakthrough. Our new algorithm hit a detection rate higher than anything else in the industry. It stopped attacks before they launched adaptive, responsive, and fast. We tested it until Sunrise ran the numbers 3 times and sent a white paper to Kendra Morris at SecureTech Global. She replied in under an hour. "This is the best thing I've seen in a year. Can you come in tomorrow?" The meeting was quiet at first. Kendra read through everything line by line, and we sat there waiting. Then she looked up. "This isn't an improvement," she said. "It's a shift. If your product works half as well in deployment, we want it." They signed a licensing agreement the following week. Their payment didn't just cover our bills, it gave us a runway. And they gave us something more valuable than money and network. Within 6 months, we moved out of the apartment, hired 3 engineers, took over a 2-room office with a window that overlooked a parking lot. It might as well have been a palace. Our name changed to Horizon Secure after a trademark conflict. We signed contracts with 2 banks and a university, then a hospital network, then a government contractor. The first time we were featured in a security roundup, I mailed a copy to my parents. Mom texted, "I see your company made it into something technical." Dad wrote interesting write-up. "Let me know when you're looking for a real job." We didn't answer. 3 years in, we were profitable. That didn't mean private jets or rooftop offices. It meant we had a staff of 27. It meant people trusted us with their systems. It meant I could take a breath. But I didn't change much. I still drove the same 10-year-old car. I still lived in a modest apartment. I didn't see the point in drawing attention. I kept waiting, hoping maybe that someone in my family would ask. Just ask. At the 4th of July barbecue, Dad pulled me aside near the grill. "Still at the cyber place," he said like he'd forgotten the name on purpose. "Still there," I answered. "We're doing some work in finance systems now." He nodded slowly. "Well, you know, James Patterson's kid is a VP at East Bay Bank. I could make an intro. Might be time to think about something real." Before I could say anything, Mom called out from the patio. "Lauren, dear, come meet Kyle. He's a lawyer. Very steady, very grounded." She leaned in as I walked by. "And he's single." At Rachel's birthday, she unwrapped keys to a new Mercedes and turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Maybe next year you'll trade in that Honda," she said. "If your little firm makes it." I looked around the room. Their life was still built on image. Vacations, designer labels, charity events. But I knew things now they didn't know I knew. Their house was mortgaged twice. Dad's firm was slipping. Rachel's business was propped up by loans. One evening, Mom called and asked casually if I could cover $5,000 for landscaping at the lake house. Just this once, she said, "We're a little tight right now." I sent it. Then came another request. And another. One day I opened a message from my financial advisor, Jonathan Wells. He'd flagged a string of withdrawals tied to my father's firm. "Charles has been overextended for a while," Jonathan said. "He's leveraged across a lot of personal and business accounts, and he's been borrowing from relatives." That's when it all started to come into focus. They needed me. They just didn't know it yet. And the longer I stayed silent, the more I began to wonder what would happen when they finally saw what I had built. That answer would come sooner than I expected. In the 12 months following our acquisition by SecureTech Global, I kept everything quiet. Only the legal and financial teams knew what the deal had really meant for me. After taxes, after bonuses, after making sure every single member of our original team got their share, my portion came out to just over $94 million. But no one in my family had any idea. From the outside, my life looked the same. I still lived in the same one-bedroom apartment in Cambridge. I still drove my same old Honda, the one with the dented passenger door and a heater that barely worked. I wore the same clothes, answered the same work emails, showed up at family dinners like nothing had changed. What they didn't see were the documents filed under LLCs. They didn't see the Vermont lake house purchased in cash or the foundation I quietly started for women in STEM. They didn't know I was now funding scholarships at 3 universities or managing an investment portfolio that earned more in interest each month than my father made in a year. I wanted to see who they were when money wasn't in the room. The next time I saw my family was at Rachel's bridal shower. It was held at a private club just outside Boston. The parking lot was full of Range Rovers and imported sedans. I parked my Honda by the service entrance and walked around to the front. Inside the room was draped in pale linens and fresh flowers. My mother floated between tables, greeting guests with her signature air kiss and careful compliments. Rachel stood near the dessert bar, showing off her engagement ring, 3 carats princess cut. When she saw me, her smile flickered for a moment, then smoothed over. "You made it," she said. "I thought you might still be at your job." I told her I'd taken on a consulting role. She didn't ask more. Later that week, Mom called. "Sweetheart, your father and I were talking. The deposit for the Cape House landscaping came in short. Would you mind covering it? Just a little bump. We'll pay you back, of course." I transferred the money the same day. Then the requests started to come more often. $5,000 for Matthew's condo escrow, $7,000 for new kitchen appliances, $10,000 for Rachel's business expansion. None of it was ever repaid. I brought the pattern to Jonathan, my advisor. He pulled up the spreadsheets. "They're not just overspending," he said. "They're bleeding cash. Your father's firm is underwater. Your mother's accounts are leveraged. Your siblings are taking on debt just to keep up appearances." I asked him to run a private audit, discreet but thorough. What came back was worse than I expected. My father, Charles, had borrowed from nearly every extended family member in the last 2 years, promising big returns, offering buy-in to new investment funds. But those funds didn't exist. He was using the money to plug holes in other areas, robbing Peter to pay Paul. That same month, my grandmother Virginia called me. She wanted to take out a reverse mortgage on her home. Said Charles had recommended it. When I asked why she hesitated, he said it was just for a little while. Something about timing with the market. I paid off her mortgage anonymously that afternoon, labeled it as a banking error. At Thanksgiving, I sat beside her and watched my mother pass plates of truffle stuffing while talking about Rachel's June wedding. My father toasted Matthew's promotion. No one asked about my job. No one asked if I was seeing anyone or how I'd been spending my time. I listened to stories about country club events and charity fundraisers. I passed the cranberry sauce and smiled when prompted. Later that evening, Dad pulled me aside in the study. "You've always had potential," he said, sipping a glass of scotch. "If you'd just take things seriously, get on the right track, you'd be set for life. There's a position opening at Patterson Capital. One of my clients could make a call. I'm doing well where I am," I said. "You enjoy it, sure. But enjoying something doesn't build legacy." I didn't respond. I just nodded, said goodnight, and let the door close behind me. 2 weeks later, Rachel called crying. Her business loan had been declined. She asked if I could speak with the bank, maybe co-sign, maybe put in a word. I told her I'd see what I could do. Instead, I called Jonathan. "We need to set clearer boundaries," I told him. "Anonymous support is one thing, but I can't keep covering bad choices." He agreed. We started adjusting the structures quietly, paid medical bills directly instead of sending checks, suspended transfers to Mom and Dad's accounts, canceled the grant Rachel had been receiving from one of the Shell foundations. I wrote a letter to the board of one of Dad's funds, advising them to review internal withdrawals. No accusations, just a nudge. Erin, my old college roommate, stopped by one Saturday. She looked around the apartment and laughed. "You know you could buy this entire building." I smiled but didn't answer. That winter, I drove up to the lake house for the first time in months. The air was cold and still. The trees were bare. I lit a fire, opened a folder of documents, and reread every transfer I'd made to my family over the past year. Over $300,000, $1,000, none of it acknowledged. That night I sat by the window watching frost form along the glass. The next family gathering would be Thanksgiving again, and I knew I wouldn't be staying quiet much longer. Thanksgiving morning came with clear skies and a sharp wind that rattled the bare trees outside my window. I left the lake house before sunrise and drove the 2 hours to Westfield in silence. My old Honda blended into the line of black SUVs and silver sedans that lined my parents' circular driveway. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, I was greeted by the usual choreography. The house smelled faintly of rosemary and citrus. Staff in black aprons moved through the kitchen, arranging hors d'oeuvres on silver trays. My mother, wearing an ivory cashmere sweater and understated pearls, greeted me at the door with a kiss that landed somewhere near my cheek. "You're just in time," she said, barely glancing at the bottle of wine I'd brought. "Rachel's friend Claire is already here. She just got engaged to a cardiologist. Come say hello." I nodded and stepped inside. The great room was already full of relatives. My father stood near the fireplace with Matthew and a group of men discussing market forecasts. Rachel held court by the bay window, her engagement ring catching the light as she gestured. A few of our cousins hovered nearby, eager to be included. I moved through the room slowly, exchanging polite greetings. Most conversations drifted back to work promotions, home renovations, and destination weddings. My name came up once briefly. Uncle Greg asked if I was still with the same computer place, then turned to his son's new job in consulting. At dinner, the place cards told their own story. Dad at the head, Mom at the foot, Matthew and Rachel on either side of them. I was seated halfway down between a cousin in dental school and the wife of one of my father's college friends. The table was dressed in crisp, linen tall tapers flickering above bone china. It looked like something out of a magazine. When the soup course was cleared, my father rose to give the toast. He did this every year, a speech about family success and legacy. And every year it followed the same pattern. This year he began lifting his glass. "I'm thankful for what this family continues to represent. Excellence, hard work, and the kind of legacy your grandfather would have been proud of." He looked toward Matthew. "To my son, who led the transition team for the Westridge acquisition, youngest VP at Branner Capital to do so, you've made us proud." There was a round of applause, murmurs of approval. Matthew smiled modestly and dipped his head. "And to Rachel, whose design firm now includes 3 of the top properties in Beacon Hill. And, of course, her upcoming marriage to Christopher Whitman, an extraordinary match." Rachel beamed her hand, drifting to her ring again. He moved on to a cousin's med school acceptance, an uncle's promotion, a family friend's new real estate venture. I waited for my name. He concluded the speech with a final toast to continued growth tradition and honoring the Whitfield name. I raised my glass like everyone else, but the silence around my place setting said more than any words. I was invisible. As dessert was being served, I felt someone lean in. It was the cousin beside me. "That was rough," he whispered. I nodded but said nothing. The table came alive with conversation, wedding details, business deals, baby announcements. Rachel showed someone a photo of her wedding venue on her phone. Matthew told a story about meeting a former senator at a conference. No one asked what I'd been working on. As my father explained the importance of keeping up appearances, something shifted inside me. My hands felt still. My voice, when it came, was quiet. I sold my company last year. The room went still. Every fork paused midair. 24 heads turned toward me. "Excuse me," my father said. "I sold my company," I repeated. Horizon Secure was acquired by Secure Tech Global for $188 million. He blinked. "That's not funny, Lauren. It's not a joke." Matthew chuckled. "You mean they bought your app?" "No. They bought the whole company. My personal share was just over $94 million. There was silence. Then my mother laughed awkwardly. "Oh, honey, don't say things like that. People will get the wrong idea." I pulled out my phone and slid it across the table to my father. "That's my current portfolio, excluding real estate and charitable holdings." He looked. His expression changed just slightly. Then he pushed the phone back. "That's enough," he said. "No," I said. "It's not." I told them about the mortgage I'd paid off, the tuition I'd covered, the landscaping check, the condo escrow, the emergency loan for Rachel's studio. I told them about the family trust I'd quietly funded for Grandma Virginia. I told them about the audit I'd ordered. "You've all been talking about legacy," I said. "But the truth is, this family is one unexpected bill away from collapse." Rachel's fork clinked against her plate. Matthew's jaw tightened. My mother reached for her wine. My father stood slowly. "You've always wanted attention. But this crosses a line. If you're not prepared to act like part of this family, then you don't need to sit at this table." I folded my napkin, laid it beside my plate, and stood. Understood. No one stopped me as I walked out, not even Rachel. In the foyer, I pulled on my coat. The bottle of wine I'd brought still sat unopened by the sideboard. I stepped outside. The cold caught me hard in the chest. As I reached the car, the door opened behind me. "You've always been difficult," my father called out. "But this behavior is beneath even you." I turned, keys in hand. "I've spent my whole life doing things your way. This time I did it mine." He didn't answer. I got into my car and pulled away, the tires crunching softly over the gravel drive. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew the silence was over. 3 days after Thanksgiving, the fallout began. Rachel called twice before leaving a message. "Something's going on with Dad. I think the firm's in trouble. You need to come home." I didn't answer. The next morning, Jonathan forwarded a full copy of the audit report. Mason Whitfield Group had been sustaining operations by moving money between accounts, covering losses with loans from relatives, and relying on incoming funds that hadn't materialized. It wasn't outright fraud, but it wasn't far from it either. By the end of the week, Aunt Patricia sent a group text inviting all immediate family and concerned relatives to a gathering at my parents' home. She didn't mention my name directly, but Grandma Virginia called to make sure I knew. "You should come," she said. "This time don't let them speak over you." The house looked different that Sunday. No fresh flowers in the foyer, no music, just murmurs and sidelong glances as people gathered in the living room. Rachel greeted me at the door. Her eyes were red. "Thank you for coming." I nodded and stepped inside. Aunt Patricia was in her usual role, moving between relatives and arranging seats like it was a board meeting. My uncles and cousins had gathered near the fireplace. My mother sat in the armchair by the window, holding a folder on her lap, but not opening it. She didn't look up when I walked in. Grandma Virginia waved me over to the couch beside her. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "I'm proud of you." I set my briefcase down on the coffee table. Across the room, Matthew stood with his arms crossed. His expression was unreadable. We waited. 15 minutes later, my father stepped in from the study. He looked thinner than he had at Thanksgiving, still well-dressed, but something in his posture had sagged. "Let's begin," he said. Patricia opened with a statement about family concerns and financial uncertainty. She spoke carefully, as if every word had been pre-cleared by a lawyer. My father took over from there. "There have been questions about our firm's recent performance," he said. "These are market adjustments, temporary. We're navigating them as a team. What matters now is preserving family unity." He cleared his throat and glanced toward me. "And we're fortunate that Lauren has had success recently. It's time we come together for the good of the family." Several people turned toward me, unsure of what to expect. I opened my briefcase and took out the top document. "This is the acquisition agreement," I said. "Horizon Secure was acquired last year for $188 million. I handed the first page to Patricia, who passed it around the room. My father didn't move. "This," I said, taking out the next packet, "is a full audit of Mason Whitfield Group, conducted by an outside firm at my request." There were murmurs. Someone near the back exhaled loudly. "The firm is insolvent," I said. "Client money has been used to sustain operations, new investments have gone toward covering old promises, and multiple family members have been misled." My mother finally looked up. "You had no right," she said. "This was private." I didn't respond. I pulled out the last document, a breakdown of the anonymous financial support I'd provided over the last 2 years. The mortgage coverage, the tuition fund, the loans that were never acknowledged, the business grants that disappeared into Rachel's studio, the quiet checks from Matthew's credit cards. "I've been supporting this family," I said. Silently, while being treated like the one who never measured up. My father stepped forward. "This is betrayal," he said. "You think you're helping, but all you've done is undermine us. This family has a legacy." "No," I said. "It had an illusion." Rachel stood next. Her voice was low. "She paid off my lease," she said. "I didn't know it was her. I thought it was some sponsor through the grant. I told everyone I built it myself." She looked down. "I didn't." Matthew moved closer to the fireplace. "You let us believe you were just scraping by," he said. "You let us talk down to you." "I did," I said. "I wanted to know if anyone saw me without the money." My Uncle Robert cleared his throat. "I invested with Charles," he said. "I used my retirement savings. What happens now?" My father didn't answer. "I can't repair what he promised," I said, "but I'm willing to create a fund, not for bailing out lifestyles, for actual needs, medical education emergencies, but with oversight." Patricia looked around the room. "That's fair," she said. "More than fair." My father shook his head. "This isn't how we solve things. This is shame. This is spectacle." "No," I said. "This is the truth." The room stayed silent. Grandma reached for my hand. After a moment, Rachel took off her engagement ring and set it on the table. "I'm done living for appearances," she said. "I'm starting over." Matthew didn't say anything, but he didn't leave either. My mother stood slowly, then walked into the kitchen without a word. My father sat down in the nearest chair. The illusion had cracked wide open, and I wasn't the one holding it together anymore. I left the house quietly after the meeting ended. No one followed me. The air outside was cold enough to sting. My car sat where I'd parked it hours earlier, alone at the edge of the driveway. As I pulled away, I caught a glimpse of my father through the living room window. He was seated in the same chair, staring at the fireplace. My mother stood behind him, her arms folded. Neither of them moved. The next few weeks were quiet. No follow-up calls, no group texts, no apologies. Rachel reached out once. She asked if we could meet for coffee. We did at a small place near my apartment. She looked different, less polished maybe, but more honest. "I don't know how to rebuild everything," she said, "but I want to try. Not just the business. Me." She told me she'd broken things off with Christopher. She was downsizing. She'd started looking into community college courses in early education. "Do you think I could do something real?" she asked. "You already started," I said. She smiled, then wiped her eyes with a napkin and said she wanted to earn her place at the foundation, not inherit it. I told her I'd help her find a role that fit. Matthew was a different story. He didn't reach out directly, but a message came through Jonathan. He wanted to know if I could refer him to someone who worked in values-based consulting, somewhere outside the finance bubble. "I don't think he's ready to talk," Jonathan said. "But he's listening." Our parents, on the other hand, stayed silent. Grandma Virginia came to the lake house for Christmas. We drank tea by the fire and played cards well into the evening. She told me she'd been reading the audit report slowly, 1 page a night. "I knew something was off," she said, "but I never knew how far it had gone." She reached for my hand. "Your grandfather would have admired what you did. He believed in work with integrity, not in what it looked like on paper." That same week, I received notice that my father had formally stepped down from Mason Whitfield Group. His resignation letter was short 3 sentences. 2 days later, a legal envelope arrived. Inside was a request for a meeting. The firm's remaining board members were restructuring, and they wanted to sever any appearance of family ownership from the newer investment arms. It was clean professional. The documents had already been prepared. We met in a neutral office downtown. I brought my attorney. My father came alone. He looked older. His suit fit the same, but his expression didn't. As the attorneys walked through the papers, he said very little. At the end, he signed where he was told. Then he turned to me. "I built all of this for the family," he said. "I know," I said. He waited a moment longer, then stood and left. That was the last time I saw him face to face. My mother called a week later. She asked to meet for lunch. We sat in a quiet restaurant near her new apartment. She wore less makeup than usual, and her pearls were gone. She didn't bring up the meeting. She didn't talk about the business. Instead, she asked if I remembered the piano teacher I'd had in 4th grade. "You used to come home with those little practice stickers on your fingers," she said. I nodded. "I didn't know you kept going after we stopped paying for lessons," she said. "You taught yourself. I found the old recital program. Your name was in the top row." Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then she said, "I don't know how to be just Diane. I've been Mrs. Charles Whitfield for so long, I didn't offer a solution. But I did pay the check." As the new year came, I took a long weekend at the lake house. Snow had covered the back deck. Inside it was quiet. Just the sound of the fire and the occasional gust of wind against the windows. I pulled out a notebook and began sketching plans for the foundation. We had our first 10 scholarship recipients. One of them, a girl from rural Ohio, had written a letter that stayed with me for days. "No one in my family understands why I like code," she wrote, "but I do it anyway. I don't want to change who I am to be loved." I folded her letter and placed it inside the drawer beside my bed. Later that night, I sat in the living room with a cup of tea watching the snow fall slow. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like space. Spring arrived in New England soft and slow. The ice melted from the lake in careful layers. In the quiet of my Vermont house, I found a rhythm, one that belonged to me alone. Morning walks through the woods, evenings by the fire with a book and a cup of tea. The foundation grew too. We expanded our team, brought in new mentors, started accepting the first wave of scholars. Rachel called often. She would stop by sometimes on weekends, her car filled with art supplies and thrift store finds for her apartment. She had started classes in early childhood education and volunteered 3 days a week at a women's shelter. She wanted to do something honest, something that mattered to her, not just the family. "I feel lighter," she told me once, sitting across my kitchen table. I never thought I'd be able to say that. Matthew reached out as well. He'd enrolled in a workshop for career changers. He started seeing a counselor for the first time in his life. His emails were short, but more open than I'd ever known him to be. He apologized not for what happened at the meeting, but for all the years he'd measured worth the wrong way. "Maybe we both needed to be humbled," he wrote, "to see what really counts." I met with Mom a few times over lunch. The old family patterns tried to creep in, talk of clubs, acquaintances, what the neighbors might think. But then she would pause, catch herself, and ask about my work, or share a quiet story from her childhood. "I've never been just Diane," she said during one of our meals. "It's scary to start over." She was learning how to navigate life without Dad, without the armor of social expectation. It was awkward at first, but there was a softness to her that I hadn't seen before. Dad stayed away. I heard from Grandma Virginia that he'd moved into a condo outside Boston, keeping mostly to himself. His name didn't come up at board meetings anymore, and the family trust was handled by professionals, not relatives. He sent a letter in the spring. It wasn't long, just a note saying he hoped we were all well. There was no apology, only a line that read, "Maybe in time we'll understand each other." Grandma came to visit again when the daffodils bloomed. We walked around the lake, the sun catching on the water. She told me she'd started volunteering at the library, teaching young people to read. "It's never too late to start over," she said, holding my hand. The Foundation's board met that same month to review scholarship recipients. I looked at their applications, each one a story of quiet determination. One young woman from Nebraska had written about growing up surrounded by people who didn't understand her love for computers. "Sometimes you just need someone to believe you belong," she wrote. At the awards luncheon, I sat with the new scholars and their families. No one asked about money. No one cared about job titles or where you went to school. They talked about dreams, about obstacles, about wanting something better. Afterward, Rachel and I walked through the garden outside. The sky was a deep blue, the kind that lingers late into spring. "Do you think it will last?" she asked quietly. I looked at her, her eyes bright, her shoulders finally relaxed. "It's already better than where we started," I said. That night, as I closed up the house and turned out the lights, I thought of everyone in my family, the ones rebuilding, the ones choosing honesty over appearance, even the ones still holding on to the past. It was all still fragile, but it was real. And for the first time, that was enough. Summer came slow that year, each day softer and warmer than the last. At the lake house, I found myself waking early, listening to the sounds of water against the shore and birdsong drifting through the open window. The air felt lighter, as if the house itself was learning to breathe again. The foundation's work kept me busy, but there was a different kind of fullness to it now, a steady, contented rhythm that let me close my laptop each evening with a sense of purpose instead of pressure. Rachel stopped by on weekends sometimes with fresh flowers or stories from her new classes. She spoke with a quiet pride about the children she worked with at the shelter, and I saw a softness in her that I'd never noticed before. We would sit on the porch sipping iced tea and let the conversation meander. Sometimes there were long stretches of silence, and those silences felt like comfort. Matthew called every few weeks, checking in from the city. He sounded calmer, more certain. He was building a new kind of life, and though the path was unsteady, he was moving forward. Once he thanked me not just for the help, but for forcing a kind of honesty he hadn't known he needed. Even Mom, living on her own in a small apartment near the library, seemed to be growing into herself. Our lunches were less about the past and more about what was possible. She had joined a book club, started volunteering at the animal shelter, and sometimes she would call just to share a recipe or ask about a good movie to watch on a rainy night. There were no grand gestures of apology between us, just small, steady efforts that slowly stitched trust back together. As for Dad, he stayed distant, still a shadow on the edge of things. But the anger that used to fill every silence between us had faded. I had accepted that some doors might never open again, and that was all right. One Sunday evening, Grandma Virginia came for dinner. She set her hand over mine and told me she was proud, not because of the money or the headlines, but because I had chosen to live with truth. It's a rare thing, she said, to break the old patterns and still find your way back to kindness. Looking out at the water that night, I realized that justice hadn't come with fireworks or dramatic speeches. It had come slowly through setting boundaries, speaking honestly, and allowing each of us to find our own path. There were scars, yes, but there was also real connection, more genuine and gentle than anything we'd had before. If you're still listening, I hope you remember this. No matter how far you wander from the life others expect of you, it's never too late to build something true. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought not for money or recognition, but for the quiet right to be yourself and to be loved for that alone. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. If any part of my story resonated with your own, I'd be honored to hear about it. You're welcome to share your thoughts or simply take a moment to reflect, because every life, no matter how tangled, deserves a chapter of peace.